Well, welcome back, everybody. This is another episode of TrekWars at OSU. I'm Joseph Orosco. I'm the co-director of the Inares Project for Alternative Futures at Oregon State University. And we're here with the TrekWars Collective to do a special episode, one that is always a lot of fun. This is our best sci-fi episode for 2021, in which we go around and we talk about our favorite sci-fi movie, film, book, product that came out in 2021, and we talk a little bit about what we enjoyed about it, what it told us about storytelling, and what it tells us about thinking about society, social change, and social transformation. So let's get underway today. I want to introduce you to my special guest today. The first, of course, you know him from the Inares Project work. We've done many, many things over the years, and one of the original members of the TrekWars at OSU collective. That's Dr. Randall Milstein. He's the astronomer in residence for the NASA space grant located at Oregon State University. He's an instructor in science and at the Honors College at OSU, and he teaches classes in astronomy and physics. But we have a special new guest, someone who has worked with us on the Inares Project before, but this is his first time coming on screen with us. My old friend, Dr. Jason Scully. He is an assistant professor of urban and regional planning at Eastern Washington University, up north from us. And so welcome, Jason. First time for you to appear with us.
Good to be here.
Cool. So I'm excited to speak with you both. This is always a really fun kind of episode to think about what came out. And this year was, it was really a busy year in terms of sci-fi product. So we're in the second year of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're at the time that we're recording this, we're sort of starting to face down what might be the wave of the Omicron infestation. So a lot of really serious things going on in the world, and this has been a big marker this year for the tragedy that COVID-19 has been. For many people, science fiction stories, science fiction fantasy are places that they turn to for entertainment to escape from the world. But a lot of the stuff that we pay attention to here is thinking about ways in which the storytelling can give us hope, can give us meaning and direction, and give us ways of thinking about the world that might be able to help us deal with the kinds of issues and problems that we see in the world today. But there's been a lot of stuff that came out. I'm just thinking, like, in terms of like my bread and butter, which is Star Trek, right? We're currently in the middle of Star Trek Discovery season 4. Star Trek Lower Decks season 2 came out. The premiere of Star Trek Prodigy on Nickelodeon. And then, of course, my big favorite, I'm wearing my Rocinante shirt, right? This is season 6, final season of The Expanse. And the final volume 9 of the Expanse series came out, which rounds out that series. On television, of course, the Marvel Universe, we had WandaVision, Hawkeye, Loki, Falcon and Winter Soldier, and a bunch of other different product as well. Star Wars had Bad Batch season 2. And then, of course, there was the one that I haven't seen at all yet, and I hear so many mixed reviews about, Foundation on Apple TV. And then, of course, this fall was finally the premiere of Dune, the movie. And just a few days ago, right, the release of The Matrix 4 Resurrection, right? And so there's been a whole slew of different kinds of things to escape into. And so wanted to hear from both of you. What's the science fiction that most impacted you in 2021? What stories really stuck with you for this particular year? Jason, let's start with you as our newest guest on the program. So what's really stuck with you?
Thank you. So kind of nothing stuck with me at first. I kind of had to sit back and really think about what really touched me and what made me feel something. Of course, I saw the tent poles, but Dune didn't give me the feels I wanted to have, and we'll talk about Dune later. Um, but the thing that really sort of jumped out at me was a specific episode of the CW's Legends of Tomorrow. And I'm wearing my Star Labs shirt, but of course it's backwards, so it says rats, which is kind of funny. Um, but so in July of this year, there was an episode, season 6, episode 4, I think, don't quote me on that, called This Is Gus. And this episode focuses on one of the superheroes on the show who's an Iranian American from the year 2040 something, and he's a pothead. And I'm not a pothead. I've actually never smoked weed, so which is odd. So it's not usually my thing, but this episode just kind of blew me away in that it talked about the importance of having people be people represented on TV. So here's this character who's a stoner hippie, new agey, vibey dude who's also Muslim, also very tied into his Persian heritage, and it's just like this very well-rounded character. And then as the story progresses, it's complicated, but due to time travel hijinks, his favorite TV show that was filmed 20 years before he was born, when he was a small child or something like that, gets canceled. And so instead of being a pothead, he turns into a Wharton business school alumni, and he's very and so his friends have to rewrite the timeline to make him who he's supposed to be again. And the not so subtle subtext, is that Hollywood can give us these very good representations of people of color, or it can give us well-rounded people of color who are interesting. And I want to say flawed, but flawed is not the right term, because they don't play Bayrod's pot use as a flaw. It's just a part of who he is, and it's possibly a less savory, less sellable aspect of who he is than if he were from Wharton Business School. So I was just like surprised that they decided to have this whole conversation about representation on a show about time travel. But then Legends of Tomorrow was just a joyful, stupid, goofy mess of representation that I love it.
Yeah, I always appreciate your reflections and comments on pop culture, because you relish in on some stuff that's just like purely entertainment. Like stuff is just like really goofy, bad TV, right? But you're able to find these notes about the sort of social importance about it. And I think that's something interesting that's been going on with a lot of sci-fi recently, is this kind of attempt to make sure that there's representation. So representation matters, but more and more people are wanting really complex stories and with these diverse characters. And so it's no longer enough just to have diverse representation if there's not an interesting kind of story that really fleshes out the character and their background and their heritage, or their orientation in some way that makes it relevant and interesting and not a caricature. And I think that for so long the motto was just simply representation matters, but now I think it's representation matters some, but without good storytelling, it seems like pandering.
So I've decided that there are two types of representation. This should be a paper, but who has time? The first type of representation is just you substitute the male character for the woman, the black character for the white character. In Dune, they substituted a white male doctor for a woman of color, for a black woman, Cheney. Sure, why not? It's great. What I like is that I can see more people who look like me, look like society, look like my family. And the gender diversity allows for women to say, yes, we are the equals to men in every way, which we definitely need to be showing more on TV. Um, but it doesn't go deeper than that, and we definitely need that. But we also need the type of representation that's not substitutable, where you can't just sort of say, I can't think of an example off the top of my head. Well, the movie Love Simon, which is about a gay teenager. You can't substitute a straight teenager for that and have it be the same story. You can't substitute a girl and have it be the same story. So Lovecraft Country from last year, which was wonderful, was a story that was so grounded in the Black experience that you couldn't do any fun racial or gender swapping of the characters. The characters were grounded very much in their race, their class, their genders, in a way that's authentic. What I love about the the DC TV universe is they managed to do both. And in the Flash, Iris very well. Barry Allen, the Flash, his love interest is Iris. I can't remember, Iris West. And in the comic books, this is a Silver Age comic. She was a white lady, and they just cast her as a black woman in the comic book series in the TV show. And it didn't mean anything. It didn't show anything deeper than, hey, she's a black woman. And so that's that first level of representation. And then they've done a couple of episodes since then where Iris says, I'm a black woman, and then it grounds it in a black experience. So having that both is important. I don't know where I'm going with this anymore.
I think that's right, and I think that Hollywood writers are trying to figure out how to do that, because I think in the past they haven't necessarily known how to do that very well without being stereotypical or caricatures of diversity. Yeah. So Randy, tell us, what's your nominee for most impactful science fiction or fantasy that you saw this year?
Well, I would go with one thing we didn't talk about really, and that's season 5 of Rick and Morty. Because I thought Rick's character development and his starting to feel that Morty is more of a balanced part of his life, I thought was kind of important. I'm looking forward to season 6, whenever that happens. But there's all the tentpoles, like we said, the Expanse. Of course, I look forward to the Book of Boba Fett's coming. Dune, when it came out, was a big deal. Bad Batch, Obi-Wan's coming. But I never got to see Raised by Wolves in 2020. So that's kind of last year. But that, I think, had a real influence on me for the year. But the one that was released in 2021 that I thought was the most important for me was Joss Whedon's The Nevers. And you might have to try to look for it, but it came out. And the notes I made for myself, I thought was very interesting, is that you have this character that's both played by Laura Donnelly, called Amalia True, and her past soul had been removed, played by Claudia Black, was a soldier named Zephyr. And then she has a friend, Penance Adair, and they run an orphanage now in Victorian kind of steampunky London. But I think what caught me is the themes of it. And because they seem kind of relevant to today, where you've got these people, mostly women, which is really important, and the people in London refer to them as the touched. They're not the nevers. The nevers part is that they never should have been there. That's what society thinks about them. And that something with these people is not how it should be, at least within the paradigm of that lifetime, which is a very patriarchal, stratified society in London at that time. And that they basically tell these people they don't have the right to be there. And that they've inherited really interesting powers that are based in whatever was important in their personality. And that society is then telling them, you don't have the right to that power either. You're not following the natural order of things. And as a result of that, we're going to take you and experiment on you without your approval. We're going to ostracize you, kill you in many cases. There's one whole thing where they're trying to execute someone and imprison them. And it has this really big statement about how that happens right now in our own society. how they're not like, this certain group of people, usually I would say white Christian evangelicals think you should be, then they're going to try to do whatever they can to strip that power from you and tell you that your identity doesn't have any right to exist. And that I think that theme really comes out. And originally, the series again was being directed by Joss Whedon, and then of course all of his complications. And they have a new showrunner now, but is really doing a good job. And I look forward to that because I think that's telling people, at least in the storyline, that they don't have a right to have a place in the world, at least not in whatever the society is. And that these people, especially these very powerful women in this story, are rising up against that. And I look forward every week when something would come on. Of course, I'll watch anything with Claudia Black in it, so that's neither here nor there. But those stories I thought were really good. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to what's coming up. And again, the people who are acting in it are very strong and very powerful as well.
Yeah, I enjoyed. I saw that series too. I enjoyed and I got caught up in the story. It was exciting to see, and and as you were pointing out, all these kinds of like connections to trends going on in the world today, where there's so much political polarization, and definitely in the past 20 years, right? This kind of enemification of certain groups of people, strong kinds of voices of tradition, right? And so what's interesting about that in the Nevers is that there's a kind of a character that's emphasizing the importance of conserving tradition, and which means excluding these kinds of people. And so the social political analogies to today are very, very strong, and sort of shows that kind of strong exclusionary voice is ever present in society, and rises to prominence in lots of different ways, and how it's a real struggle, right, as the show shows, to create those spaces for the acceptance of difference and different people and people with different abilities. Right. What I like about that show a lot is the importance of, right, so all of the touched have different kinds of powers that they have received as a result of this cosmological event. And so they have to learn how to work together in some way to be able to accomplish the hijinks and the tasks that they need to accomplish. It reminds me a lot of the ways that, we've talked about this before, about how the future of Star Trek is this kind of vision where really competent people have to work together to be able to get things done. And it's very rare that you have, like one sort of hero that accomplishes everything, but it's usually kind of an ensemble of differences accomplishing really good things. And I think that the Nevers does a really good job of trying to sort of show the complementary strengths of all of the people who are touched.
Yeah, I think the other show I mentioned that I didn't have a chance to see a year ago, but saw this year, Raised by Wolves. There's some really interesting themes there, coming from a science physics background. The fact that you have this group of science-based critical thinking, that they're identified as atheists on Earth, against this religious cult, in the conflict between an empirical factual world and one in which the suspension of disbelief is so important. To reject facts ends up in this conflict that basically decimates Earth. And then they go off to Kepler 22b, and both are trying to establish colonies there, in the same conflicts there. And it's this whole thing about how difficult it is to try to change people's belief systems, even if there's no factual base to any of it. If it's something someone gets into their head that they believe, it's hard to pry that out. I had a discussion with someone I know here in town, and they were telling me something that they believed, and I asked them the simple question, why do you believe that? And they came back at me with, I believe what I believe because I believe it. And I said, well, how did you get there? Can you explain to me how that developed? I just believe it. And then we look at the political situation. We see the anti-vax movement, which is based in no kind of reality, complete suspension of disbelief. And then you watch Raised by Wolves, and mother and father, the androids, how they're trying to deal with and teach these children. And children hear a story, and the next thing you know, they're off on a belief system. And and how one of the people who has assumed someone's identity from the Mithraics, the religious people, starts to absorb that belief system as well. That's Travis Fimmel's character, Marcus, which is played like Ragnar Lothbrok in space. I don't see much difference. But, his wife, on the other hand, who's assumed an identity, Sue, sees that conflict and is trying to hold true to what she brought with her as one of these scientific fact-based people, and trying to work with mother and father, the androids. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. They had only made about half the season, and it was already reordered for a second season. It was received so well. So I am looking forward to that coming along too.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one, but Travis is one of my favorite actors from Vikings. But yeah, I'm not sure if he has enormous range in his work, which is okay. I've seen him in, I think, one other thing that he did, and it was essentially the same Ragnar Lothbrok character, which is great. He's an icon. I love that character. But yeah,
Well, I will say that the characters who play the androids, mother and father, Amanda Collin and Abu Bakr Salim, wow, if she should be nominated for everything, if she wasn't in 2020, because that is very, very powerful acting. And just this character of Lamia, she can turn into a necromancer, and is just basically a weapon, unstoppable weapon. Had been developed by the religious faction, both her and father, and they had been taken captive somehow and reprogrammed, and now they're helping the group of scientific people rather than the people who originally invented them. This mass killing machine was invented by the religious fanatics, not by the science-based people.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm thinking about this. That seemed to have been a theme in 2020 of. There was that program, and then there was another one that I'm thinking of that I think it was a Netflix show about a child being raised by a android in a sort of a contained environment somewhere in the future, and so this kind of question about like caring was very prominent, it seems, in 2020, which makes sense, trying to figure out how exactly do we show care to one another. So I think that theme seems to make a lot of sense.
Well, I think the theme in this too, that you're having children, a group of children, being raised by technology. And that is a huge question right now in our own societies. Kids locked into video games and computers and cell phones. And I even see that in my own undergraduate students. When you ask them about what type of technology you think if it was a solar storm, you could live without. And they all said they can't live without their computer. They can't live without their phone. How would I do my schoolwork? How would I do this? Library? Write a letter? But they've been completely enveloped in the technology. And of course, that probably developed because in their earlier lives, that was given them as an option for entertainment and to keep them busy and to keep them out of the parents' hair. And so I think that idea of raising children by technology is a big thing.
Yeah, and something that's going to be moving more and more as VR develops. The Meta, right, as Facebook's parent company starts to sort of develop its virtual worlds, right? No, I think that these are all interesting themes that are starting to develop in kinds of ways, which leads me to sort of think about like the thing that I chose, which I think I chose last year as well, if I remember correctly. One of the things that most impacted me, I think, was The Expanse. And so this isn't my favorite science fiction story, and in fact, my wife hates it because she thinks it's such a dark vision. So whenever I start watching this show, she walks away. But it's ending its run on Amazon, the series with season 6, and as I mentioned, the last volume of the book series, number 9, came out just a few weeks ago. But what I found interesting about it was that it ends on a hopeful note. Both apparently the series and also the the books have this the sort of like metaphysical picture behind it is starting to develop. And Daniel Abraham, who is one of the authors, the twin authors who produce the Expanse series, said something like this. It was a quote I wanted to read to you both. He says, "There's a quote from Camus that is something very much along the lines of, 'There's more to admire in humanity than to despise.'" And that's what we're trying to do with The Expanse. Both versions of it, the books and the show, look at humanity and find it worth loving, warts and all, with all of the violence and the prejudice and the tribalism, to see that we're still a pretty amazing species. We've done some amazing stuff. And for all of the horror, kindness is still more the message that comes through from, or at least that's what I hope. So that's Daniel Abraham, one of the writers of The Expanse. And so I like that because, very often, and I often talk about this too, right? Star Trek is portrayed as this series that tries to give us hope about the future, a utopia that develops out of the dystopia preceding it. So we have to get through a lot of wars and disease and destruction to get to the Star Trek utopia. And the Expanse universe takes place roughly around the same time as the Star Trek universe, right? Something in the 23rd centuries or so. But it's a much sort of darker vision of sort of corporate intrigue and political infighting and wars between different aspects of humanity that is moved out into the solar system. But I think that it tries to sort of portray the idea that humanity, all of the sort of problems of humanity are still going to be following us no matter where we go, right? The sort of polarization, the tribalization, but that ultimately what matters is our ability to reach out and to be kind to one another. And that's what really allows us to be able to be the kind of species that can move out into space and to succeed. And it's not our technology, it's not our scientific ability at heart that makes us a progressive species, but this ability to be kind to us. But sometimes that can be, sometimes that option of kindness is one of the hardest ones to try to achieve. And the other sorts of warts of our nature get in the way and that preclude us from being able to have the best kinds of futures that we can often get. So I think what The Expanse tries to do is to be realistic about the possibility of utopia, but ultimately it's hopeful in the sense that we do have it within ourselves to be to achieve a much better kind of space for us. And what matters are relationships between different, small relationships between people. It's not the big sort of political structures that matter, but the ways in which we interact with one another and can care about each other. And so that's why I tie it into sort of this question about like the question of care, like how do we care for each other? And The Expanse to me has been one of these things that even in its dark visions, tries to hold on to that kind of picture of this quality of humanity. And the other thing I wanted to say before we start talking about that is the other thing that made an impact on me. I was sharing this, viewers. I was sharing this with my co-panelists before we started. Was something that really got to me this year was this album by Doja Cat, Planet Her, right? And so if you haven't listened to this album or seen the videos, I mean, I say go and check these videos out, right? So Planet Her is the latest album by Doja Cat. It was dropped in April, I believe, of 2021. And Doja Cat, of course, is known as an artist that sort of gained prominence first on TikTok as an e-girl, and then sort of progressed to sort of a kind of a pop rapper. Went into sort of a high fashion stage. And then this latest sort of incarnation is an Afrofuturist glam doll. And the videos for this are very interesting. I mean, she doesn't have a strong sense of Afrofuturism in explaining the concept, but she said that she wanted to have a complete album that talked about something space agey. Sort of the videos for each of the songs, particularly Kiss Me More, Need to Know, and You're Right, all take place, she says, on different parts of this imaginary world that she calls Planet Her. And the visions are very strong of this very sort of different kind of world. And what struck me about this when I was watching this, particularly the video for Need to Know, was that it struck me as the visuals brought to mind Samuel Delaney's work. If you know him, the black queer writer, compatriot of folks like Ursula Le Guin, and particularly his sort of vision in something like Babel 17, which was one of his very first novels in the late 1960s, I believe it was. But it was this vision of a really diverse world with all these kinds of polymorphous, different kinds of beings who were doing various kinds of transhumanist things with their bodies. And so like high fashion was like learning how to like grow flowers out of your body and things like this. And it was just this kind of colorful, diverse world that is sort of now something that is common in sci-fi, that you want to sort of depict like bar scenes of diverse aliens and things like this. But he has these amazing images like that, and I think that Doja Cat sort of in her videos brings out some of that. And part of her idea, right, the sort of Afrofuturist idea, of course, is imagining a world, a reality that is grounded in the Black experience and offers a way for Black people to imagine a world in which they exist in liberatory freedom, sexual pleasure, right, and liberation in some kind of sense. And I think Doja Cat really does that with these videos, even though it's mostly grounded on like physical sexual pleasure. This was important for Delaney as well, as a gay man, to try to imagine a world like that for his science. So that science fiction was a vehicle for him to be able to do that. And so one of the sci-fi highlights of 2021 for me were Doja Cat's videos for Planet Her. So don't play the songs around your kids, because they're not family friendly. I learned this when I was listening to one of these videos with my daughter present. I had to quickly shut it off because it's not family appropriate, but visually very, very stunning. So for me, The Expanse and Doja Cat. So let's talk about what underwhelmed you this year in 2021. What was it that just did not do it for you? And I'll begin, and then we can sort of go around with this. For me, what I was really looking forward to was Dune. And Dune, for me, Dune is like one of these things I grew up with. I actually saw the David Lynch film before I read the books. And the David Lynch film, even though it's not at all really coherent with the books, presents a really otherworldly vision. I always thought of that sort of the aesthetic of Dune 1984 as being so different and so odd and weird that I really dug it. It felt like this was the year 10,000 or something or other. I could imagine it being that just because it was so bizarre. I liked Dune 2021 in some ways. I'm looking forward to the second part of the story and seeing if Villeneuve like goes on with it, as he's saying that he wants to make the whole trilogy of the Dune story. But I don't know. I mean, I didn't get that otherworldly feeling from Dune 2021. It didn't seem to me like such a weird world in the way that 1984 did. And so I enjoyed it, but I was underwhelmed by it. I'll go see it just because I'm a sucker. But I just didn't feel that it captured that sort of strangeness that I expect from Dune. And plus, Dune is a weird sort of story together. I've been trying to figure out, like, I think Dune is actually a dystopia, right? I think the original 3 novels, I think that this is a dystopic warning about fascism. And so it's always hard for me to really get on board with Paul Atreides because I know that he's a fascist at heart, right? And that the world, and then plus also the sort of Orientalist imagery that goes on with it a lot is problematic in a lot of ways. So Dune has never been one of my favorite universes to get into, but I enjoy it nonetheless. But I wasn't able to sort of imagine that I'd want to watch this film, 20 years from now. with a lot of anticipation in the way that I still watch Dune 1984. So, Jason, what do you think?
I was so excited for you to ask this question because Dune is my answer too. And we're also hyped for Dune, but I think Dune represents my biggest pet peeve about science fiction, genre fiction, that we've had for probably the past 20 or 30 years. I the key word is exuberance. I think that TV shows and movies have lost exuberance. So if you look at sort of the 70s was sort of this peak point of just like bizarre, anything goes. Flash Gordon is just luscious and crazy. And of course David Lynch's Dune, which just takes us 10,000 years into the future, gives us little echoes of a Renaissance past to ground us. So we're completely disoriented. And then there's the Battle Pug, where what's his face is taking a pug into battle, and then what's his face has to milk a cat, and just the whole thing was just like excessive. And I think sometime probably Dune may have been the David Lynch's Dune may have been what led us into the slide of we're out of exuberance and into realistic. Well, if aliens really existed, they would look like this. If AI existed, it would look like this. So we get this very stifled example of what the future looks like. And my best example I have for the lack of exuberance in our media is those first movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, up into Scarlet Witch's first costume. That, like, the original Scarlet Witch comic book design, she's got this giant headdress. She's wearing a one-piece bathing suit and fishnet stockings, and it's apeshit crazy. That's not what people would wear in real life. And if you had to do hand-to-hand fighting and use your telekinetic and your hex blasts, it's completely wrong. And so the producers were like, well, let's be sensible and let's be adults and let's make sure we give something that the audience can understand and replicate. So we'll put her in a red leather jacket. And just like the exuberance is gone and the fun and the joy is gone from it. WandaVision seems to be bringing that back. And I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe is starting to figure out more and more to be goofy and to be strategically goofy and exuberant. And taking this back into Villeneuve's Dune, there was none of that there. It was exactly what you could imagine. It does the job. We're like, okay, this is kind of what I think of Arrakis. But the only disturbing thing was that Gimp spider in the Harkonnen palace. We're just like, what the hell is that? And we needed a little bit more of that to make it interesting and to resonate, and to tell us a story and bring us into the world.
I'm curious. So this is like an aside, but I'm kind of curious. Like, you're talking about like this kind of downsliding from exuberance and over the topness to realism, and you mentioned the MCU. Do you think that was what held back, right? The Jessica Jones, the Daredevil, the Netflix MCU collaborations that were early on? Those seem like they were trying to ground these superheroes into a realistic universe. Like, what would it really be to be a superhuman in New York City or something like that? And so that those early series were part of that kind of attempt. It seems. Were they lacking as a result?
Well, it's one of those things. Be strategic, and you think about the vision of what you're trying to do and how you're trying to sell something. And I think what they were trying to do required them to be restrained. That first season of Jessica Jones with the restraint, where there's no exuberance because everything in her head is sufficient to propel the story forward, and everything in her head is so over the top and exuberant that you don't. it would have lost something if you put her in a pink and purple costume and had her flying with the cape trailing by. You didn't need that. I think the problem with those original Netflix shows was pacing. Just they for me they were a little bit slow, and it was a little bit too cerebral, and just easy to fall asleep and lose track and just end up not caring.
Yeah, I think that might be right. I mean, I think I enjoyed Jessica Jones. I love Daredevil. I got lost in The Punisher because that was just too boring for me. And what was the one?
Luke Cage.
Yeah, Luke Cage I loved visually in a lot of ways, but no, the one I was thinking about, what was his name? Super Fist.
Yeah. Iron Fist.
Yeah, that just bored me to death. I didn't want to see, the story of a rich white billionaire who gains superpower martial arts stuff is just like, no, this is not really any story that I care to watch in any kind of way. But I do see what you're talking about, this kind of loss of exuberance in our imaginary worlds. And I wonder why that is. Well, Randy, what do you think? What was it that underwhelmed you this year?
Well, it'll be surprising maybe when I tell you, but I want to comment on the other things too. I felt the same way about Dune. Visually, coming from actually, though I'm a scientist now, I came out of an art background. Visually, it was stunning. I will never forget the scene when they came off those ships on Arrakis and the wind is blowing those dresses and the veils of all those women. That was really visually strong. And I mean, I've read Dune years ago. I have a first edition Chelton copy sitting over on my shelves here. But also the MCU, when you mentioned that, I think the ones that I've really enjoyed, I mean, I've watched all 20, whatever it is, of the films, but the ones that really got me was Waititi's directed Ragnarok, because it was funny.
It was
And
exuberant.
yes, and also I think of Hawkeye right now too. Like the playoff between, Haley Steinfeld's character and, Hawkeye, it's just fun. And I really look forward to that new episode. I've really been caught up in that story. But the one thing, science fiction, I think that kind of let me down this year the most was Andy Weir's book, Project Hail Mary. After reading The Martian, having read Artemis, which really, especially Artemis, really drew me in and captivated. And as an astronomer, the science part was cool because he did a really great job. In Project Hail Mary, the science is great and how he explains things to people who aren't scientists, how it would work. I just couldn't get behind either of those two characters. Nothing I found about them was compelling. I mean, I read the book and it was very interesting, but I thought the portrayal of the alien was very characterish, or like comic booky, and it could have been stronger. I mean, explaining why the alien was as he was, I think was very important for people to understand. But I just had, here's this huge book, and I read the whole thing. And I was just, okay, I'm done. I'll go back and read a couple comic books or something that I bought.
So The Martian really made an impact like that on a lot of people's imagination. I think the copy that I bought in the grocery store because it was such a big thing. They were promoting this book so many places, now motion picture and all this kind of stuff. So I caught it as part of a buzz. It was like I was checking out of the grocery store and I was like right there, and I was like, I hear a lot of people talking about this. I want to check it out. And so I think, if you're a hard science kind of person for sci-fi, it was something that really caught a lot of people. And the story, the kind of idea of, again, this kind of question about like compassion, like, would we go out of our way to take care of one another in the way that we do to try to take care of this astronaut stranded on Mars?
That came out in Project Hail Mary as well. I think some of the decision making by one of the characters would not be what you would normally think of. But I think the thing it was, I didn't like the portrayal of the alien character very much. It made it sound like, the American astronaut guy was all cool and the alien was not quite as sharp or something. And, that's not necessarily true. The alien was a brilliant engineer. Just was the portrayal. Didn't strike me as strong as I would like to have seen that character be. But
I don't know, your work is a lot in terms of your classes and in terms of like, what does the allegory of the alien mean for in different sort of social eras.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that you pay attention to that kind of portrayal of aliens quite a bit in your work.
How we treat the other says an awful lot about us.
Mm.
And it seems to change about every 10 years. But we look at the science fiction that's being produced right now and see how those aliens are portrayed. And then we look at how we're dealing with refugee crisis in the world. And I think it's a really nice analogy for those things.
Yeah.
I did see an interesting movie and just a couple days ago. And it was, when I read it, I thought it was a science fiction movie because it said, something about alien, blah, blah, blah. And so I don't know if it really fits in, but it was called Encounters. It was an Amazon film. And interesting, like Jason was saying before too, about there's different types of characters across cultural boundaries. It's about an ex-soldier who just got out of prison. I remember his name's Malik Khan is the character. And what happens is he's interested in parasites. And he starts thinking about aliens are coming in from meteor showers. And what you learn throughout the film, though, as he's trying to pursue this and takes his sons away from their home with him, is that he has schizophrenia induced by his PTSDs. So while it's talking about aliens in a broad sense, it's really this cultural thing happening. And there's this character that is an ex-Marine, Malik Khan, how people react to him in a couple situations. They're calling him different names, and you understand the pressure on him. But I came into it thinking it was a science fiction movie, and actually it was a drama about mental illness.
Interesting. But again, that same sort of portrayal of the question of like, how do we think about other difference and using the alien as a reference point?
I'm gonna derail this. I'm sorry. I think that's a great conversation. It's a conversation that we need to keep having. But lately, kind of what's interesting is how we treat the same, how we treat our equals and our peers. And the Expanse in Star Trek Discovery, actually Star Trek Picard, has been showing me that we're having problems treating ourselves and our peers right. So while the real story and the story that everyone's really interested in is this other that's happening, and are we going to embrace the other? What are we going to do? How are we going to set it up? But the way in which the co-workers, the colleagues, and the equals work together or don't work together, I think tells us something about the unconscious biases of the writers and the producers of these shows.
Jason, do you think that's because of a sense of competition between equals that's driving that? Or what do you think is pushing that idea forward of treating equals unfairly?
I think that the framework of capitalism and the framework of just the neoliberal framework of our society put some blinders on ideas about the ways in which we can relate to each other people. The Expanse, I was enjoying The Expanse. I thought it was a really dark vision of humanity that I thought was kind of annoying to me. And then they got to Earth. And I was like, well, this doesn't make any sense at all. Is that their parable of Earth in the future is exactly the negative stereotypes of inner city people of color on welfare that people had in the 70s and the 80s. And it was wrong then, and it's wrong now. What happened in the 70s and 80s was, there were a lot of tragedy, a lot of loss of life, a lot of mental illness, and a lot of drug addiction. Yes, but there was also hip hop culture. The 70s, you see the development of hip hop culture, these ideas about self-sufficiency in music, just these new ways of doing things. And so you have like this 100-year time frame where you have this global world government that's feeding the entire population on Earth by oppressing the people who live off Earth. And they're treating this entire population as if they're all sort of feral monsters ready to revolt at any moment, rather than, wait a minute, there's a hint of post scarcity. They might not be able to do everything they want, but they still have an internet. They still have free access to knowledge and technology. You just you can imagine that in a world like the Expanse, where this is happening, that people would be doing amazing creative things with very little resources and very little wealth. Yet the presumably upper class, presumably white, presumably male writers, showrunners of The Expanse can't imagine the rich vibrancy of life like that. So it ends up being this subtle backstory that's causing tensions. Meanwhile, they're out there dealing with this bizarro, crazy alien with the spores and the whatnots. And I'm thinking, holy cow, you guys have just completely written off the way humans respond on Earth. And I don't like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that I always thought the portrayal of Earth in the show is a little odd. I mean, because it's a planet where, everyone talks about being on basic, right? Well, so apparently, there's billions of people on Earth at this point, right? And that everyone is essentially in a huge global social welfare state. But it portrays, that you see what in the show, I think it's New York and inner city Baltimore, and they look like run down. So it's this kind of odd libertarian vision of like what's going to happen if we get social democracy. Everyone's going to be demoralized and no one's going to be able to do anything. So you go off world to really experience creativity, right? And you become a belter, or you become a Martian, right? And so it does. The question about like, what about all the humans on Earth? Well, it seems like it's a pretty miserable lot. Everyone wants to get off world. There's no opportunities, and so I think that it's in that sense. You're right. I think it's a really unfortunate and unrealistic depiction of the creativity of human beings. One show that I think that has really been interesting in regard to that, though, has been Star Trek Lower Decks.
Yes.
I don't know if you have watched much of this, Randy, but season two has been a really interesting exploration of class struggle, anti-fascism, and this kind of question about like working class solidarity, right? And how important it is for people in the kind of labor hierarchy to work together to sustain themselves, and that there's actually like more creativity and imagination and competence in folks in the working class than there is at the higher levels of command and structure. And so the subversion in Lower Decks is really interesting. And of course, Lower Decks is done by the folks who used to do Rick and Morty, Mike McMahon and stuff. And so I've just been like, the storytelling in some of Lower Decks has been really fascinating to me in the second season, because of those kinds of themes that are really strong. They're not subtext. They're like the main parts of the stories.
Well, this is where Star Trek, the new Star Trek reboot series, gets really problematic. Is we have Picard, where Jean-Luc has people working in his vineyards. Are they a working class, or are they choosing to do that? In Lower Decks, the Lower Decks characters are the working class, but they've also volunteered to be working class. That there's no sort of coercion. They're doing this for their own internal reasons, and there's that whole conversation about, I like what I'm doing and I'm going to stay here continuing doing this, or I'm going to try to rise up the ranks and become the next Riker. And Picard just showed us a really horrible Earth. It showed us an Earth with the same exact class conflicts that we have today. And it's just like, well, that can't be right. That's not what Roddenberry said.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of sort of controversy about that, is right, because you have. I know that you've talked about this, right? The character of Rafi and Michelle Hurd, right? Like the way that they've done her wrong, portraying like a competent Black woman who's living out in a trailer, hooked on drugs and dispirited and broken, And like, why did it have to be Rafi? Why did it have to be her, right? And why is this still going on Earth in the 24th century?
Yeah. And I think we can all imagine this future where everybody is doing something that brings them joy, and these individual things that we do that bring us joy somehow form this collective joy, this collective exuberant utopian society. And I think Roddenberry got that, and Roddenberry Star Trek was trying to give us a lot more of that. But then I think the way in which we've been framed to be limited in our ideas about what's possible and what you can do in society make that difficult. And the writers always complain about, well, we can't tell a story without conflict. And so their idea of conflict is, well, let's show that the Federation is eroding from the inside, or that these people who are the best of humanity can't get their poop together to do what needs to be done. And I was like, why? We can have great stories where everyone's working together as a team, but still bad things happen.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting, right? So the exuberance, the loss of exuberance is not just a stylistic or aesthetic kind of thing. It's a loss of political imagination.
Yes. It's a Blade Runner is part of the problem. Blade Runner is a huge part of the problem. So I'm using my laptop, which doesn't quite work. I'm at my friend's house, and I had planned to have the Logan's Run background for, and somehow we went in like a 10-year time period from imagining future cities looking like Logan's Run to looking like Blade Runner. And I think we then applied this cyberpunk vision of the future, and everyone sort of thinks the future now is going to look like Blade Runner. And J.J. Abrams applied that to Star Trek, to Star Trek. And it's just like, those cities are cities that are created by a neoliberal corporatist world where corporations are controlling things. Like they have these tall buildings that are cutting off view corridors of the ocean and of historic sites, which our societies today would not allow that. So we would have to get a lot more capitalist and a lot more neoliberal before those cities could happen. And we're so far to the right on so many things anyway that it means that what we're doing is trying to reinvent the Blade Runner vision of the future, because that's what we think the future looks like, but trying to shoehorn in a utopian society into those buildings.
I think that if you really want to go back a little ways, the Firefly Universe is like that too.
Yeah.
This political blue sun, this Anglo-Sino corporation that's now assumed political power as well, and military power, and everything you buy from a can of beans to the radiator in your spaceship has got a blue sun stamp on it, and it's a kind of a fascist image too.
The stories that we can tell based on our understanding, based on the time and place in which we're embedded in a capitalist structure, tell the stories that we can tell are about dystopias where everything's controlled, where everything we do is regulated by another party, or it's complete and total crazy anarchy.
Yeah, it's Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah, and we don't get to see that many examples of worlds where people are coming together and societies and civilizations are working. I have a theory that the last truly modernist sci-fi movie is Close Encounters of the Third Kind, because you see everybody working together as a team. The government is working together as a team to do things, and every single one of them is a consummate professional. The problem is they're deceiving people, but it's just Steven Spielberg. For him, it's this love affair to the working government employee, the government.
Right now, though, we see in our own reality at this time, the complete and utter disrespect and disregard for knowledge and professionalism.
Yeah.
Asimov said that throughout American history, there's this long thread of anti-intellectualism that's founded in the false premise that people believe democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge.
Uh-huh.
And then as a result of that, we see it now with the pandemic, we saw it politically in the last couple of years, that people, a class of people, we'll put it that way, has a complete and utter disregard for anything that's factual or presented by people who are professionals in their field. And, it's kind of flabbergasting. You wonder how they got there. But I think that pops up in our entertainment too. You think about the fact if you ever watch the X-Files.
Yeah.
All the credit was given to, spontaneous human combustion and aliens, conspiracies and everything, but the physician was disregarded all the time.
Uh-huh.
Disrespected most of the time, Agent Scully.
Yeah. What we see is we see the dissolution of institutional structures, or the creation of monstrous institutional structures. And so Star Trek was this sweet spot where we could see strong institutional structures, great competent people within those structures representing the best of ascension life forms with strange things on their forehead if they weren't humans. But I think a lot of writers said this is too limiting for us, so let's make people squabble and let's dissolve it. And so Star Trek Discovery for me became very uncomfortable because it was about sort of deconstructing the Federation, making the Federation bad. And they're working on it, and I'm still watching the show, and I'm still hopeful, but I was very upset with the way the Federation proceeded in the 1,000-year jump that they did with the show.
I think when you're talking about the writers, I think this is important. It's one thing I like about The Expanse, and actually Game of Thrones too, even though it was a fantasy, was that characters don't have plot armor.
Yeah.
They get written off. They get dead.
Yeah.
Or spaced. And you can have a big role in the story, and the next thing you know, you're gone, because that's what happens in real life oftentimes.
Yeah.
And so that consideration, I think, is kind of important in these writings as well.
Yeah.
Yes, you can be contributing and be a powerful character, and then, like I said, you're spaced.
Right. Well, let's try to bring this around to close off. Some really fascinating discussion here about like where we're going with visions of the future in our writing and our imagination. But I want to know what you're thinking that you're excited for in 2021 in terms of any stories or sci-fi fantasy products that might be coming online that you are hoping will bring you joy in the new year. So, Randy, what are you looking forward to?
Oh, Book of Boba Fett next week. I think that it seems from the trailers that that's pretty strong. Obi-Wan will be coming out as a Star Wars instructor, do those kind of things. Hopefully that Mandalorian 3 would be interesting. And of course, like I said, season 6 of Rick and Morty. One of the things we didn't talk about, I thought, because it was on a network television show that was kind of interesting in its own way, was Resident Alien.
Oh, yeah.
And Alan Tudyk's quite good in that, and it brought me joy, made me happy to watch that. And also, The Boys will be reissued. They'll have caught up in the COVID year, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, The Boys is one of my favorite too. But then again, it's one of these sort of like realistic dystopian visions of the superhuman, which I enjoy, right? Trying to figure out like what this means for us. But that theme is becoming really starting to wear thin for me in a way, in a lot of ways, right? So, Jason, what are you looking forward to in 2022?
I'm looking forward to going to a movie theater without a mask and being able to eat popcorn and drink soda and just enjoy a movie.
And so that's going to be in 5 years from now?
Yes.
Yeah, curses. Yeah. No, that is a good hope. I don't know if that's going to happen in 2022, but hopefully soon.
No, hopefully soon. Knock on wood. Um, I I've changed my relationship to pop culture. I don't look forward to things anymore. It's I kind of dread. I saw the latest teaser for Picard, and it felt like a whole bunch of fan service. And I was just like, I don't really want to watch that. Same with the Matrix movie, which is out now, so it counts as 2021. I just haven't seen it yet, but it sort of feels like there are all these things I have to see because I'm sort of keeping up with an old friend, and just like, like they're not doing well. This is the friend who had all the promise, who stayed in the small town and didn't leave like they thought they were going to do. So you're going to go back and like, oh, how you doing? You're still living with your parents? You're still working there?
Is that why I never see you at the reunions? Sounds like a college reunion that you want to avoid, man.
Well, yeah, except I do go to the Reed reunions. We're just off. It's like I'm going to see all these shows. I have this duty to the shows. I have this huge backlog of Marvel that I feel like I have to watch because they're my friends. And I want to support them, but I'm not thrilled. I'm not thrilled by anything right now. And I think what's going to happen is something's going to hit me out of the blue. And I'm like, whoa, and that's going to speak to me. And that's what I'm looking forward to. It's that thing that I didn't know, because I don't know that the franchises have anything more to say to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that what I'm looking forward to, I think, is a bit of weird nostalgia and hopefulness. Is that the one thing that I have on my radar that I really want to check out, and I worry so much that it's going to disappoint me, is the premiere of Star Trek: Strange New Worlds.
Oh, actually, yes, I'm excited about that too.
Well, see, so it's this, we've been talking about this, like, what was the vision of Roddenberry? And the vision of Roddenberry was Captain Pike with Number One and Spock, right, on the Enterprise, going and exploring strange new worlds, right? And so that vision of over, almost close to past 60 years now, has finally been made on network television. Well, streaming television, right? And so, and the producers have said they're going to try to go back to episodic rather than serialized storytelling, emphasizing this kind of notion of exploration. But they have this background now of things like Discovery and other sort of serialized stories that are really focused on sort of the internal lives of their characters and sort of the deconstructing of the Star Trek universe. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, how they're going to blend all of this, that original Roddenberry vision, with all of the kind of realism emotional, impactful realism that they've been trying to build in the last, say, 7 years or so with all of the new Star Trek into this new storyline. And what stories are they going to be able to tell? And you were mentioning this kind of idea, like, are they going to be able to sort of get to that kind of imaginative future, which is, the exuberance of exploration in some way, or is it going to, fall back in line with the sort of the dystopic kind of reality of Picard or Discovery? And so I'm hopeful. I'm doing this, but I recognize too that part of it is kind of like this nostalgia for me. It's sort of like I got to see Pike and Number One and Spock, right, in the way that they were from the pilot in '64 or whatever. And so that's sort of exciting, but I'm just worried I'm going to be let down. So it's one of these things where it's sort of like waiting to go to the movies. I'm hopeful, but at the same time, who knows, like, when the next pi wave of the virus is going to come along and we're all going to be, hunkering down in our bunker somewhere. So it's this, it sort of mirrors the time, I think, in which we're at.
So one of the things, if I could imagine what I would really like to see, a sci-fi / I guess it's in the Star Wars universe though, is somewhere down the road, somebody talk to Filoni or somebody at Disney Star Wars and say, in a few years from now, let's make a film in which the character Rey encounters Ahsoka Tano. Two incredibly powerful women, one who's gone strictly the way of the Jedi, and the other one who is kind of a gray Jedi, is broke away and disillusioned, but is still a strong character within the Star Wars universe, especially in The Mandalorian now, maybe your own spinoff. I think that would be an interesting film.
Throw in Ventress and you have a deal.
Pardon?
Throw in a Asajj
Oh,
Ventress.
Ventress. Yeah, she's great, but I don't know where she dies in that timeline.
She does die?
Yeah, there's
Well,
somewhere along.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, because she's a great character too, and again, someone who was totally dark side,
Yeah.
and then came back and had a redemptive phase in which she, helps Obi-Wan and does the right thing in the end. So yeah, I just think that there is a lot of cool stuff available there. That kind of an encounter would be interesting, and how they, especially Rey, what she would learn.
Yeah. There's so much potential for Star Wars. I think that's all to say about that. There's a lot of potential.
Yeah.
So just fingers crossed that they don't fuck it. That they don't screw it up. Quoting RuPaul and don't. Start the Brave New Worlds, Strange New Worlds. I'm excited about that too. And you're right. That's going to be such a tough needle to thread.
Yeah, well, let's think about getting together a year from now and see where we've come, and whether or not this all came together, or whether all the stuff that we were looking forward to falls into our disappointed pile. But I want to say to both of you, thank you very much, Jason Scully and Randy Milstein, for coming on and sharing with us your thoughts about the possibilities of storytelling that emerged in 2021, what we can hope for in terms of imaginative visions of what the future might hold for us, and what we can struggle for. Always a good conversation to have with you all. So I appreciate both of you being here today.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Hope to see you again real soon.
Yeah, hopefully very soon. And Jason, you're coming back sometime, man.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is
all right. Well, and thank you all for tuning in and spending your time with us, and letting us talk a little bit about what impacted us this year. If you have suggestions, something that we missed, or if you want to take us on for some of the things that we had to say about your favorite sci-fi for 2021, drop us a line, send us an email. You can find us at anaresproject.org, and you can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and you could also listen to some of our selected podcasts on Anchor FM, Spotify, under the Anares Project. But thank you very much. We hope that you have a safe and wonderful 2022 coming in, and we hope that you finish 2021 very safely and take care of yourselves. So thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joseph. Bye.